Hey everyone, it's Erin with Hail Varsity. I'm joined by recruiting extraordinaire Greg Smith, also of Hail Varsity, and it is a early signing period, early signing day extravaganza. This is a special video. We are coming to you, well, depending on when you're watching it. It might be live, might be a little bit after fact, doesn't matter, but we're here to recap the day. Greg, how are you? I assume you might be tired.
Listen, we're getting to that critical point here. I was just thinking about, like, after this video, should I just tell Erin that I'm going to bed? Yeah, I'm very tired, but excited still because there's a lot that happened today. It's always, one of my favorite days of the year.
It's an exciting day. I think this is a day that, we talked about quite a bit in our recruiting question of the week videos and other things leading up to this. And obviously we knew this was going to be a smaller class, but there was still some excitement around it. If you are looking for just hey, I just want the high level stuff, just give me the details, or I don't want to get into too much of the detail. I just want to know kind of what happened today. Head over to hailvarsity.com. Greg does have a full recap for you in tonight's recruiting notebook. You can also see the recruiting, the early signing day central page that can tell you kind of what's going on, what to expect. There's still more to come. But let's just start here, Greg. When we talk about today, you have said it went pretty much as planned. There wasn't really any major excitement. What was your big takeaway from today?
Yeah, I think that is the first thing, is that Nebraska had another signing period, and last year was like this too, where everything was business as usual and done when it came to Nebraska's commits coming into the day, sending in their letters of intent with no drama. I think this year by 9:30 a.m. Central Time, everyone's letter of intent was in, and I can't impress enough. And you follow recruiting on a regular basis, how good that is for Nebraska, how much less stressful that is, because every year it doesn't fail around the country. You're seeing schools start to sweat it out as their star quarterback recruit has not sent in his letter of intent yet, and you're trying to figure out what's going on. So Nebraska once again avoided that, which is kind of objective one on today. So that was my biggest takeaway, is that Nebraska had another drama-free early signing day, or at least the first signing day.
Now, they did get some, not so much surprise, I guess, but they did get some not previously committed commitments and then ultimately signees. Can you talk about sort of those? Like I said, I don't know how much of a surprise they necessarily were. I think people kind of saw them coming, but still, nonetheless, they were commitments and signees today.
Yeah, I think the one that was not seen as much coming was Justin Evans Jenkins, and that was more so because he's so new onto the scene. He's an offensive lineman out of Irvington, New Jersey. It's the same high school as 2021 signee Mekhi Gabor, the linebacker that's on the Huskers now, and so there was a connection there. But Justin came in for an official visit this past weekend, the last weekend for official visits before the early signing period began. I think the Huskers like him a lot as an interior offensive lineman. There were some schools recruiting him as a defensive lineman, but the Huskers like him in the interior of the offensive line. Scott Frost noted his aggressiveness today in the press conference and his wrestling background, which I know makes a lot of people excited because my mentions filled up about his wrestling background and how people like that. The other commitment that happened today that was not previously known, publicly at least, was the running back Emmett Johnson out of Minnesota. That one seemed to have been trending Nebraska's way for a while, even though it feels like he's been on the radar now for like a month. But that's really only been 2 weeks that we've been talking about Emmett Johnson. He was Mr. Football in Minnesota after having like 2,600 yards in his senior season and 42 touchdowns. Nebraska had him here for the Iowa game for an unofficial visit, went and saw him in home both weeks during the contact period, then had him here for an official visit. And so you kind of see how it kind of was building along the way. He committed to Nebraska on Instagram Live, I believe, earlier today. And so he's now the lone running back for high school signees in this class. Also, Evans Jenkins is the only offensive lineman for high school as well. So you got those two boxes check marked as well today.
I will say when you talked about the dual sport athletes, the ones that don't just play football, they participate in other sports, that actually came up with Gage Stanger. I was able to go to his signing ceremony at Millard South this morning, and he talked about being a dual sport athlete. He's going to be playing basketball. He will not be enrolling early at Nebraska because he wants to continue. He wants to play basketball through his senior season, and he's actually, interestingly enough, which Scott Frost kind of mentioned this as well during his signing day press conference. There's a couple of players that are still to be determined on what position they'll play in college. Gage is one that is considered an athlete because he is technically right now also a quarterback, and he will continue to work on his throwing motion and work on his quarterback skills over the winter into spring. And interestingly enough, the person he is working with is Riker Fife. So it was a very small world, but it sounds more likely that he'll get moved to the defensive side of the ball once he arrives at Nebraska. But knowing Nebraska could always use depth at quarterback, it's not entirely ruled out that he won't see potentially that side of the field. But I think Nebraska, it sounds like he kind of knows that too. It's kind of one of those things where if it doesn't work at quarterback, we'd like to move you to the defensive side. So he's aware, and he mentioned wanting to play in that nickel spot. So that was kind of fun to hear from him as well. Now, for some of these players, it was actually a very, while the day itself, as far as signees were concerned, was drama-free, it was actually kind of a drama-filled day in Nebraska. For many of you, you may know what we're talking about. The weather had took quite the turn this afternoon. For some of you in Iowa and up into Minnesota, you're still dealing with that weather. So hopefully everyone in the path of today's storms stays safe. Hopefully you've stayed safe through the afternoon and continue to do so through the evening hours. But it did actually affect people. There were a couple of players like Jake Applegate at Lincoln. He's at Southeast.
Southeast.
Yep, I almost said Southwest, and I knew that wasn't right. At Lincoln Southeast, who had to move his signing day ceremony back a day because school was canceled in Lincoln, and because of that, there were no signing day ceremonies. Ernest Hausman, I know, Greg, you had checked in with his family, and it actually interrupted his signing day ceremony, and thankfully, they were able to continue seeing it through, and they're all safe and sound. But I know in some areas of Columbus, some people were not as fortunate. So it was a very dramatic day. You even got to be at the stadium today as like bad weather was rolling through, but you also got to hear from the new assistant coaches as well as Eric Shenander and Scott Frost. So I guess, Greg, when you think about this afternoon and the things that you got to hear and who you got to speak with, what maybe stood out to you about that today?
Yeah, I think one of the things from Eric Shenander was the competition that has come into the defensive room. And this is something that I kind of wrote about for yesterday's recruiting notebook, Tuesday's recruiting notebook, depending on when you're watching this, is that the defensive back room has kind of not so quietly been reshaped. And I'm not even sure that they're done necessarily bringing defensive backs in through the transfer portal. And so everyone's being put on notice that's on the defense, but also on the team as a whole, because there's any number of spots on the offense that transfer portal guys could be coming in as well. And I asked Shenander specifically about that. And he talked about wanting guys to embrace competition and that he's not satisfied until they're three deep at every position. And he tells his guys that and that he thinks ultimately it can make the team better. And so that really stood out to me. I got to hear some from new offensive coordinator Mark Whipple. And honestly, my very quick impression from him is that he was a guy that was really confident in the way that he spoke and carried himself. He carried himself like a veteran coach that has been around for a long time, that's seen a lot, and that has a resume to kind of back that up. I thought it was really interesting when he was asked about transfer portal quarterbacks, because that continues to come up on an almost daily basis with you guys' questions, was that, hey, he said essentially, and I'm paraphrasing, I've got the resume to back this up, to go and tell transfer portal quarterbacks that if you guys want to play in an offense that has produced high-level quarterbacks, I've done it at different levels and at different stops. So come play for Nebraska. Like, it was really interesting. I encourage you to check out his full video on hailvarsity.com as well.
I did see one of the statements that I was reading the comment originally that he made, where he was essentially like asked something along the lines of like, why Nebraska? Like, why did you leave Pitt for Nebraska? And he was like, it's Nebraska. So Nebraska's reputation still precedes itself. I know that's something that people are concerned about, is, Nebraska maybe not being viewed a certain way. And clearly that hasn't necessarily stopped, coaches from wanting to be here, at least not all coaches, because he seemed to be very much, like I said, it's Nebraska. Why wouldn't I be interested in that role? I did have a chance to recap Frost at the podium today. It was mostly, I guess, not a surprise for anyone. They're going to be looking at the transfer portal. Greg has talked about that endlessly. But the big piece that they're going to be looking at the transfer portal for is quarterback. We do know that, like I was saying with Gage Stanger, they do need depth there. But it really looks like they're looking for somebody with experience who can come in and help run this offense. They'll obviously be going with a brand new center as well, with Cam Jurgens moving on. But Frost even talked about that there are a number of offensive linemen who have played the center position prior to now. So they will start working with their new position coach and start figuring that out. But it seems like quarterback is one that they're definitely going to be looking at the transfer portal. So these next couple of months are going to be a really, really big deal for Nebraska as we get closer to the traditional signing period. Would you agree with that, Greg?
Yeah, absolutely. And I also think that, real quick to circle back, when you mentioned about
circle back.
You mentioned that, Nebraska's brand, I guess, and how people were kind of concerned about that taking a hit, either in the coaching search, especially, but I think also in talking to prospects and guys in the portal as well, there are a lot of guys out there that still want to be part of Nebraska football. And I think that if you were someone that was concerned about that in Nebraska not being able to find people, I think that these last couple of weeks have maybe put some of those concerns to rest, or at least knocked it down a couple of pegs. It's never going to totally go away, but knocked it down a couple of pegs. But I think that these next couple of weeks are going to be really important because Nebraska ultimately is going to want that transfer portal quarterback in here in early January. That's just a couple of weeks away. So we're in a dead period right now that runs through like the second weekend of January. So there's not a lot of time between now being in the dead period and being able to potentially host people, and then this next semester starting, and that next semester starts, I believe, on January 15th. So it's going to get hectic here again after probably a quick breather.
And you might be wondering, what is Nebraska going to do about Nebraska has not yet hired a running backs coach officially, has not done anything as far as a potential special teams coordinator, coach, whatever. But obviously you can't hire both of those without some other change. I've kind of been telling people, like, maybe part of the waiting period here is there's still potential shakeups somewhere on this staff. Like, we don't know that, like, there might not be other areas where we know, Mike Dawson has taken on special teams before, so it doesn't seem like that's necessarily going to be the answer. But, there could be shakeups somewhere that, who maybe takes what. So Frost did talk about that today. He was asked if he could provide any kind of an update. He did say he has a pretty good idea of what he's going to do and he is real close to making some kind of decision. But as of right now, that hasn't been settled. Sounds like we will know something soon. But really, the sooner the better for Nebraska, because especially as you're starting to look into the transfer portal and trying to, make the most of this next month ahead of you, you need to have the people in place to be able to tell people this is what we're looking at. So I know for the most part, the key spots are settled, but at the same time, it doesn't hurt to actually have that running backs coach in place and to be able to tell people this is what you can expect, especially when you are looking at special teams. Now, I have to go back to Gage Stanger really quick. When we talk about special teams, he was asked, do you care what position you play at Nebraska? And he basically said, I will do anything that gets me on the field, anything that helps the team. So it sounds like they're continuing to really put that bug in players' ears of, if you want to play, special teams is the place to do it, especially early in your career. That is something where I know the defensive coaches have said many times, I want every single player in my room to want to be on special teams, to compete to be on special teams. You do want that. Hopefully that kind of perspective eventually then translates onto the field and there are no additional special teams mishaps. But it was at least interesting to hear him say that.
Yes, absolutely. I think that making special teams boring should be a goal of the offseason, right?
Same thing as offensive linemen, like a center position. You don't like, if you are a center, just like a snapper, like a long snapper, you don't want people to know your name. You don't want people to have any idea who you are. You just want to do your job and you want to do it well, because when you are boring, that means you are doing things correctly. So here's to boring special teams in 2022. We'll know more, I guess, once Frost is willing to share what those decisions he have made are, and once those things are settled and we get those news. But again, it sounds like he's pretty close on making that announcement and decision. Before I let you go for the evening, Greg, because I know you have had a long day, there's plenty ahead. What do people have to look forward to? I know there's one more decision that is on the radar that people I think are very interested in, but what do people have to look forward to in the coming days? Because the early signing period is not over. It runs through Friday. So for people who are like, is it done? It's not. There are still
Right.
2 more days of this. Now, it's not going to be as chaotic as today is, but
Right.
there's something that people might want to keep an eye on.
Yeah, you always want to keep an eye out because when you one of the things is when you have so much coaching turnover on the offensive staff, you just never know if they've been working on someone very under the radar, and if somebody they can get that was potentially going to decide in February now wants to decide, earlier in December. So that's one thing. The other thing that people really want to know about right now, though, is what's going to happen with Dakotas Crawford on Friday. He's a wide receiver, high 3-star wide receiver out of Louisiana. He was a longtime LSU commit with Mickey Joseph. Mickey Joseph, once the coaching staff shakeup happened at LSU, he decommitted from LSU. He has looked around at some other places, but Nebraska has reoffered him and has been heavily in the picture with him. I do think that Nebraska has a good chance. It's hard to handicap at this point because he has just not been on the radar for a long enough time for me to have a very good feel on it, outside of kind of just what you hear. But I do hear good things could be coming Nebraska's way in that situation. But it is the early signing period. It's natural letters of intent. You never know what can happen in the end. But a lot of Husker fans will be watching anxiously on Friday.
You never know until they sign on the dotted line. Well,
Yes.
Greg, thank you as always. I hope you can get some sleep and get some rest. I know for anyone who is looking for more, head over to hailvarsity.com. There's tons of content from today so far, plenty more to come. We heard from a number of coaches. We have a ton of content. Like I said, some players had their signing ceremonies moved, so that might make for additional content to come. So just head over to hailvarsity.com. We'd love to have you as a subscriber. If you're not already, you can actually subscribe by heading there. If you have questions, comments, whatever, we do enjoy when you leave them here in the video comments of this YouTube video. So feel free. We'd love for you to continue this conversation. Greg, until next time, like I said, go get some rest. We'll talk to you later.
I will try that. Thank you, guys.